A racist police officer kicks a homeless black man, but he doesn't realize that someone is watching the entire encounter and gets instant karma. It was a quiet afternoon on this nearly deserted street, and Jamal Thompson sat slumped on the cold steps of a shuttered shop, a faint warmth coming through his thin jacket. He leaned back, his eyes half closed, taking in the muted sounds of distant traffic and the occasional murmur of people walking by. This spot, out of the way and under the shade, was a rare refuge, one he knew might not last long. Then came the sound of boots, heavy, deliberate, echoing down the empty street. Jamal opened his eyes, instinctively tensing, already guessing what was coming. A figure in a police uniform was approaching him, the officer's face shadowed under his hat, but his posture unmistakably hostile. "Thought you'd get comfortable here, huh?" Officer Walker's voice cut through the silence, sharp and mocking. Jamal met his gaze, saying nothing at first. Experience had taught him the power of silence, though he could feel his patience thinning. The officer took a step closer, his lips curving into a sneer. "What are you doing here, buddy? Taking a little nap? I can think of a better place for you to sleep it off." Jamal sat up straighter, his hands pressed against his knees. "I'm not bothering anyone," he said quietly. Walker laughed, glancing around the empty street, as if searching for an audience to witness his performance. "Bothering anyone? Just you sitting here is enough to bother me." Jamal took a deep breath. "I'm not breaking any laws." "Oh, really?" Walker's tone grew colder, his eyes narrowing. "Maybe you don't get how this works. I decide what's breaking the law out here. And you, sitting around looking, well, how you look, that's all it takes." Jamal felt his fingers tighten into fists, the familiar heat of anger bubbling under his calm exterior. He forced his hands to relax. "I'm just sitting here, not doing anything wrong." The officer leaned down, close enough that Jamal could see the gleam in his eyes. "Let me spell it out for you. You don't belong here. This isn't some shelter. This is a decent neighborhood. And you're just dirt. You get me?" Jamal's jaw clenched, but he tried to keep his tone steady. "Why are you doing this? I haven't done anything to you." Walker scoffed, standing back up, his hand casually resting on his belt. "Because I can. And because no one's going to do a thing about it. You think anyone's going to believe you? I'm just doing my job. That's what they'll say." He leaned forward again, voice dropping to a sneer. "You don't matter." Jamal's patience snapped. "You don't know a damn thing about me." "Oh, really?" Walker's eyes flashed. "I know enough. You're just another nobody who's a problem, thinking you've got some right to sit here, looking pathetic and wasting space. I'll do whatever I need to keep this city clean." Jamal stood up, his body rigid with anger. "If you think I'm scared of you, you're wrong." The officer's hand shot out, shoving Jamal back with a hard, deliberate push. Jamal stumbled, catching himself on the edge of the steps, but he refused to look away. His pride, his dignity, this was all he had left, and he wouldn't let this man strip it away. Walker took a step closer, his expression dark. "You think I'm done?" His voice dropped, filled with malice. "Maybe I ought to teach you what happens when someone like you gets out of line." Before Jamal could respond, Walker's boot swung forward, striking Jamal square in the side. The impact sent a shock of pain up his ribs, and he collapsed to one knee, breathless. Walker straightened up, eyes cold, watching Jamal gasp for air. "You think anyone cares about what happens to you?" Walker spat, voice dripping with contempt. "You're nothing. Remember that." Jamal looked up, his gaze steady despite the pain, and locked eyes with Walker. "You're wrong." A flicker of uncertainty crossed the officer's face, quickly replaced by anger. But in that moment, Jamal knew he had struck a nerve. He might be down on his luck, beaten in every way possible, but he would not break. Jamal pushed himself up from the cold pavement, pain still radiating from his side where Walker's boot had connected. He steadied himself, inhaling deeply to calm the simmering anger that felt like fire in his chest. But the officer hadn't gone far. He was only a few steps away, hands on his hips, watching Jamal with a twisted smile, almost daring him to react. Jamal straightened up and met his eyes, defiant. "You think because you've got a badge, you can treat people however you want?" Walker laughed, a low, mocking sound. "People? You're hardly even a citizen as far as I'm concerned. Just another nobody who thinks he's entitled to respect." Jamal took a step forward, his voice steady but firm. "I'm not backing down, and I don't care if it makes you uncomfortable seeing me here. I have every right to be where I choose, just like anyone else." Walker's face tightened, his sneer replaced by a dangerous glint. "Big words, tough guy." He moved closer, his hand hovering over his baton. "Let's see how brave you are when you're locked up. Maybe that'll teach you to respect authority." Jamal's fists clenched at his sides, his voice rising. "Respect? You haven't shown me a damn thing worth respecting. You hide behind that badge, thinking it makes you better, stronger, but it's just a uniform. Without it, you're just another man. Nothing special." Walker's eyes flared, and before Jamal could react, the officer's hand shot out, gripping Jamal by the collar and yanking him close. "You think you're making a statement here? You're just another mouthy punk who doesn't know his place. Maybe it's time someone showed you yours." Jamal shot back, his voice sharp. Walker's jaw tightened, and without a second thought, he shoved Jamal back against the wall, pressing his arm hard against Jamal's chest. Jamal struggled, feeling the anger boiling up, but Walker had the upper hand, pushing him against the wall with brute force. "You just don't know when to shut up, do you?" Walker hissed, his voice low and venomous. "This whole street could be watching, and you'd still end up in cuffs, because that's what's going to happen. Right now." He yanked Jamal forward, wrenching his arms behind him with brutal efficiency. Jamal gritted his teeth, refusing to give Walker the satisfaction of a reaction, even as the cold metal of the handcuffs bit into his wrists. Walker's voice turned mocking again, now loud enough for any passers-by to hear. "Look at you, big talker, huh? But here you are in cuffs, where you belong. You're going to regret this," Jamal said through gritted teeth, his voice low but steady. "One day, someone's going to see right through you. You can't hide what you are forever." Walker laughed again, shoving Jamal toward his patrol car with rough, careless movements. "Keep telling yourself that, hero. This city doesn't care about you. You're just another statistic, just another face in the crowd no one's going to remember." As Walker dragged Jamal toward the car, a voice cut through the tension. "Hey!" A tall man in a suit, clearly out of place on the deserted street, strode toward them. His expression was stern, his gaze locked onto Walker with a mix of anger and disbelief. "What's going on here?" Walker barely glanced at the man, his grip on Jamal firm as he pushed him into the back seat. "Stay out of it. Just doing my job." The man didn't back down, stepping closer. "Your job doesn't involve assaulting people on the street," he said sharply, his eyes narrowed. "I saw what you did." Walker's face flushed, but his voice stayed cold. "I'd advise you to keep walking, sir. This isn't your concern." "It is now," the man replied, his voice steady. "I'm not going to stand by and watch someone get treated like this." Jamal, watching from the back seat, caught the man's eyes through the window, a glimmer of hope flickering inside him. For the first time in what felt like forever, he wasn't completely alone. Walker stepped forward, trying to tower over the man. "Sir, I'm warning you. Don't interfere. You'll just make things worse for yourself." The man's expression didn't change. "I think you've already done enough." For a moment, the two men locked eyes, each unwilling to back down. But in the end, Walker scoffed, stepping back with a bitter sneer. "Fine, but remember, you don't know the whole story here. This man is nothing but trouble." The businessman didn't respond, his eyes shifting back to Jamal. "I'll find you," he said firmly, his voice carrying a promise. "This isn't over." Walker slammed the door shut, cutting off any further words. He climbed into the front seat, casting a scornful glance at Jamal in the rearview mirror. "Looks like you've got yourself a fan. Too bad he won't be able to help you now." Jamal met his gaze, refusing to show the fear bubbling inside him. "Maybe he will. Maybe you're not as invincible as you think." Walker didn't respond, but his grip on the steering wheel tightened, his knuckles white against the leather. With a jerk, he pulled the car away from the curb, leaving the street and the businessman behind as they drove off toward the station. Jamal sat in the cold, metallic chair, alone in the holding cell, the echo of Officer Walker's taunts still ringing in his ears. He rubbed his wrists where the cuffs had bitten into his skin, feeling a soreness that went deeper than just his muscles. This wasn't the first time he'd been here. He knew the smells of disinfectant and stale air, the indifferent glances of officers, the stark white lights that made everything feel exposed and clinical. For a while, he kept his eyes fixed on the floor, thoughts swirling. He'd been trying to keep to himself, staying out of the way. He wasn't asking for much, just a quiet spot where he could sit and be left alone. Was that really so much to ask? And yet, here he was again, punished for simply existing in a space someone else deemed off-limits. His mind drifted back to Walker, to the sneer that twisted the officer's face. Jamal could still feel the sting of that boot connecting with his ribs, the humiliation of being kicked and shoved in broad daylight. That officer had made it clear, with every word and look, that he believed Jamal was less than him, less than human. The thought tightened his chest with a bitter anger, but underneath it, a familiar ache settled in, a resigned kind of hurt, one that had grown over the years as each incident piled up. Just another nobody, the words replayed in his mind, heavy and relentless. Walker hadn't even bothered to hide his contempt, his certainty that he could act however he pleased. Jamal's shoulders slumped, a weight pressing down on him, whispering that Walker was right. He was just another forgotten face in this city, a nameless statistic people walked by or ignored. He'd been pushed to the edges, and now no one cared about what happened to him here. He closed his eyes, the images and voices of his past slipping into his thoughts. His mother's voice, telling him to keep his head up, that no matter what anyone said, he was worth something. His younger self, working late shifts, struggling to make rent, believing that if he just worked hard enough, stayed strong enough, things would turn around. But things had spiraled, one misfortune after another, until he found himself here, lost in the shadows of a city that had long since stopped seeing him. Jamal forced himself to breathe, to push the memories aside. His mother's words felt distant now, almost hollow. She'd always taught him to keep fighting, to hold on to his pride and dignity. But how could he when the world seemed so determined to strip him of both? The harsh sound of Walker's laughter brought him back, the officer's voice filtering through the thin walls of the cell. Outside, Walker was chatting with another officer, his tone casual, relaxed, as if Jamal's life was a small nuisance he'd handled and forgotten. It felt like salt in a wound, hearing Walker so at ease after everything he'd put Jamal through. To him, this was nothing more than a routine act of authority, just another day on the job. Jamal clenched his fists, feeling the tension building again. For so long he'd learned to swallow his pride, to keep his head down, but today it felt different. Today he was tired of being invisible, tired of being seen as a nobody. But what could he do? Sitting in this cell, he felt powerless. He wanted to believe that one day someone would see him, really see him, and understand the weight he carried. But after so many years, that hope felt naive, like a dream he'd held onto for too long. He heard footsteps approaching, followed by the low murmur of a voice. At first, he assumed it was another officer, ready to haul him out and process him like any other nameless figure. But then he heard a voice that was unfamiliar, calm yet firm, cutting through the tension. "Excuse me. I need to speak with the officer who brought him in." Jamal looked up, startled, his gaze falling on a tall man in a sharp suit standing just beyond the holding area. The man's expression was serious, his gaze unflinching as he looked directly at Officer Walker. Walker's face immediately darkened, his body language shifting as he turned to face the newcomer. "Sir, I already told you back there, this doesn't concern you." But the man didn't back down. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Walker's. "It does concern me. I witnessed everything." Jamal felt a flicker of disbelief. He hadn't expected anyone to care, let alone this businessman who'd watched the confrontation from afar. But here he was, speaking with a steady, determined voice that was impossible to ignore. The officer bristled, clearly annoyed. "Sir, I'd advise you to leave, unless you'd like to spend a night in a cell yourself." The man didn't flinch. "Your job doesn't give you the right to treat people like that," he replied, his voice edged with disgust. "I watched you kick that man while he was down, and I'm not going to walk away from that." Walker's expression shifted, his mask of indifference cracking just slightly. "You think you know the whole story? This man," he threw a dismissive glance at Jamal, "is trouble, a repeat offender. I'm just doing my job." The businessman's eyes narrowed, his calm exterior hardening. "If that was your job, it would have looked very different out there. Instead, it looked like you targeted him, because you thought no one would do a thing about it." Walker's face flushed, a flicker of irritation flashing in his eyes. "Sir, that's a serious accusation." "Is it?" the man shot back. "You can try to twist it however you want, but what I saw was a clear abuse of power, and I'll make sure it's reported." Walker forced a cold smile. "File all the complaints you want, sir. Nothing will come of it. No one's going to take your word over an officer's." The businessman didn't respond immediately, but his expression didn't soften. He turned his gaze toward Jamal, his face resolute, a slight nod of acknowledgement passing between them. Jamal's voice was quiet but strong. "He's right. You think because you have a badge, you're untouchable. But people like him," he nodded toward the businessman, people like him are watching now. Walker shot Jamal a scornful look, but Jamal held his ground, meeting his gaze. For the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, someone was willing to stand by him. "I'm Daniel Reed," the businessman said, his voice cutting through the silence. He gave a small, reassuring nod to Jamal, his words carrying a promise. "This isn't over, Officer Walker. I'll make sure of that." With that, Walker scoffed, turning his back on them. But Jamal could sense a slight shift, a hint of discomfort in the officer's posture. Maybe for the first time, someone had shaken his confidence. Daniel looked at Jamal through the bars, his face firm but compassionate. "I'll get you out of here, Jamal. You have my word." Jamal nodded slowly, his heart still guarded, but filled with a renewed determination. He'd been dismissed and degraded countless times, but today felt different. And as he watched Daniel walk away, he felt that long-buried hope stir within him again. He wasn't alone in this fight. Not anymore. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed faintly as Jamal sat alone in a small, sterile room at the police station, the kind meant for processing. The smell of antiseptic lingered heavily in the air, adding to the feeling of isolation that gnawed at him. He ran a hand over his face, still sore from the earlier assault. The walls around him seemed to press in, each second stretching longer than the last. But for once, he felt a sliver of hope, fragile, but real. Jamal's thoughts drifted to Daniel Reed, the businessman who had dared to stand up to Officer Walker. A part of him still couldn't believe it. People like Daniel didn't normally look twice at someone like him, let alone walk into a police station to intervene. Jamal had spent years blending into the background, the shadows where no one cared enough to look. He'd learned early on that society had a way of turning a blind eye to people like him, to struggles like his. Yet here he was, with a promise from a stranger that maybe, just maybe, someone would finally take notice. His contemplation was interrupted by the creak of the door. Daniel entered the room, his sharp suit contrasting with the drab surroundings. His face was calm but serious, his eyes fixed on Jamal with an intensity that felt almost protective. "Jamal," Daniel greeted, nodding slightly as he approached. "Are you okay?" Jamal took a breath, a sense of guarded relief in his chest. "Better now that I'm not alone in here." Daniel gave a small nod of understanding. "I'm glad to hear that. I've been speaking with a lawyer, someone I trust. I think we have a real case here. We'll get this sorted." Jamal looked at him, his expression a mix of disbelief and gratitude. "I don't know what to say. No one's ever done anything like this for me." "You don't have to say anything," Daniel replied. "What happened to you out there was wrong, plain and simple. You deserve better than to be treated like this." Jamal's gaze dropped, his voice quiet. "People have been telling me what I deserve all my life. They don't usually mean it the way you do." Daniel sat across from him, meeting his eyes with a level, unwavering look. "Well, I mean it, and I'm not just saying this for show. I want to help you fight this, Jamal. No one should have to go through what you did, but I need to know that you're ready for what's ahead. This won't be easy." A long silence stretched between them. Jamal's mind was a whirl of thoughts and emotions, a mix of doubt and simmering hope. He'd never stood up like this before, and the idea of challenging someone like Walker, someone backed by the whole system, felt like an impossible feat. But he'd been beaten down too many times, told he was worthless by too many faces. Maybe, with someone in his corner, he could finally push back. He looked back at Daniel, a spark of resolve in his eyes. "I'm ready. Whatever it takes." Daniel nodded, a hint of approval flashing in his gaze. "Good. I'll be with you every step of the way." They sat in silence for a moment, a quiet solidarity building between them. Finally, Daniel continued, "I've arranged for you to meet with a lawyer I trust, Sandra Mills. She's skilled, relentless, and understands cases like this. She'll know how to navigate the system, to make sure Walker and anyone else responsible are held accountable." The name lingered in the air, unfamiliar, but promising. Jamal felt the weight of his situation pressing down on him. But now, with a direction, with allies, it felt bearable. He nodded slowly. "I'll do it. Whatever this takes, I'm in." Daniel's expression softened. "This isn't just about Walker, Jamal. We're fighting something bigger, a system that protects people like him and ignores people like you. This is going to get attention. It might get ugly." Jamal's face grew tense. "Let it get ugly. I'm tired of being ignored, tired of being treated like I'm nothing. If this is what it takes to finally be heard, then so be it." The fire in his voice seemed to surprise Daniel, who responded with a slight smile. Good. Then let's make sure they hear you loud and clear. Just as he finished speaking, a female officer entered the room holding a clipboard. She glanced between Daniel and Jamal, her expression unreadable. Mr. Thompson, you're free to go. All the paperwork's done. Jamal let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Thanks. The officer nodded curtly, sparing a fleeting look of curiosity at Daniel, who stood up beside Jamal. Daniel thanked her with a polite nod, then placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. Come on, let's get out of here. They walked down the sterile hallways of the police station, the walls lined with old posters and warnings about various offenses. Jamal felt the stares of a few officers as they passed, each gaze a reminder of the weight of this place, the tension that clung to him every time he was forced to walk its halls. But with Daniel beside him, the weight felt a little lighter. Outside, the city's cool air brushed against Jamal's face, carrying the hum of distant traffic and the faint chatter of pedestrians. The station door shut behind them, its echo fading as they stepped away. As they walked, Daniel glanced over at him. I know this is a lot to process, but I'm serious about helping you, Jamal. We're going to do this the right way. Jamal stopped for a moment, looking at Daniel with an expression that held both gratitude and something more, an unspoken question. Why are you doing this? Why me? Daniel considered him, then replied, because it's the right thing to do, and because too many people in this world don't get the chances they deserve. If I can help even one person find justice, then I know I'm doing something worthwhile. Jamal nodded, still trying to fully absorb the reality of this situation. It had been a long time since anyone had looked at him and seen anything other than another face on the street. I won't let you down, Jamal said quietly, his voice carrying a determination he hadn't felt in years. Daniel smiled, nodding. I don't doubt that for a second. They continued down the street, Daniel explaining what the next steps would be. He laid out a rough plan for the lawsuit, detailing what Sandra would be working on and how Jamal could prepare. For the first time in what felt like forever, Jamal felt like he had a roadmap, a way forward, something to look toward beyond just getting by day to day. As they reached the corner, Daniel extended his hand. Tomorrow, we meet Sandra. Get some rest. You're going to need it. Jamal shook his hand, feeling the solid weight of it. A connection that felt real, that felt like more than just a gesture. Thank you, Daniel.
For everything, Daniel gave a slight nod. We're just getting started. I'll see you tomorrow. Jamal watched as Daniel walked away, his figure merging into the bustling city crowd.
As he turned to head in the opposite direction, Jamal felt something stirring within him, a renewed purpose, a quiet strength that had been beaten down for so long but now stood tall. He walked with his head held high, the words echoing in his mind. We're just getting started. The law office was a stark contrast to the police station. Bright, with large glass windows allowing sunlight to flood into the reception area, casting soft shadows over the polished floors. Jamal felt strangely out of place as he walked in, his worn jacket and scuffed shoes standing out in the otherwise pristine space. He clutched a folded piece of paper in his hand, containing Daniel's instructions and contact details for the meeting, as if it were a lifeline. Mr. Thompson, welcome, the receptionist smiled politely, as though she were accustomed to guests from all walks of life. Mr. Reed and Ms. Mills are waiting for you. Jamal nodded and followed her down a short hallway. His heart pounded as he approached the office door, a mix of nerves and determination filling him. He reminded himself that he wasn't alone this time, that he was stepping into this not as a nameless face, but as a man determined to make a change. Inside, Daniel was already seated beside a woman who exuded quiet confidence. She wore a tailored suit and held a thick file in her lap, her expression sharp and focused. She looked up as he entered, extending a firm hand. Jamal, I'm Sandra Mills. I'll be representing you. Jamal took her hand, surprised by the strength of her grip. Thank you for meeting with me, he said, his voice steady but a bit cautious. Sandra nodded, motioning for him to sit across from her. Daniel's told me about your situation. I want you to know that I take cases like yours very seriously. What happened to you was unacceptable, and we're going to do everything in our power to make sure Officer Walker is held accountable. Jamal glanced at Daniel, who gave him a reassuring nod. I'm here for whatever you need, he said, his voice steady, though Jamal could see the resolve in his eyes. This is just the beginning, Jamal. We're going to see this through. Sandra opened the file on her lap, her gaze unwavering. Before we start the formal process, Jamal, I need you to walk me through everything that happened that day. Every detail matters. Jamal took a deep breath, steadying himself. Well, it started when I was sitting outside that closed shop. I wasn't doing anything, just trying to find a place to sit and stay out of the way. That's when Officer Walker approached me. He hesitated. The memory of Walker's sneer, his words, and the cold steel of the cuffs still fresh in his mind. He didn't give me a reason. Just started hassling me. Told me I didn't belong there and that people like me, he said I was dirt. Sandra's pen flew across her notepad as he spoke, her expression unreadable but intent. Then he kicked me, Jamal continued, the words coming out in a rush, as if he were finally releasing a weight he'd carried for too long. Right there, in front of everyone. And he didn't stop. He kept going, taunting me. He knew he could get away with it. Said no one would care what happened to me. Daniel leaned forward, his jaw clenched. That's where I stepped in. I saw the entire thing from my office window and came down as soon as I realized what was happening. Sandra looked up, her eyes meeting Jamal's. Jamal, how are you feeling about going public with this? Filing a lawsuit will bring attention, and the media may reach out. Are you prepared for that? Jamal paused, the reality of it hitting him hard. The thought of his story being out there, of people knowing his name and seeing him, possibly even judging him, felt daunting. But beneath that fear, there was something else. Something that felt like a fire he hadn't realized still burned. I'm ready, he said, his voice firm. I'm tired of being pushed aside. Tired of being treated like I'm invisible. If this is what it takes to finally be heard, then I'll do it. Sandra's lips curved into a slight smile, approval flashing in her eyes. That's the spirit. We're going to build a strong case, but I want you to know this won't be an easy process. Walker's defense is going to try and discredit you. They'll dig into your past, anything they can use against you. Jamal looked down, the remnants of past struggles flickering through his mind. He'd had his fair share of hardships, mistakes, things he wasn't proud of, but he lifted his chin, meeting Sandra's gaze directly. I've made mistakes, sure, but that doesn't mean I deserved what he did to me, and I'll stand by that. Sandra nodded approvingly. Good, that conviction will help you through this. Daniel, watching Jamal's resolve solidify, leaned forward. Whatever they dig up, Jamal, it doesn't change the fact that you were mistreated. Sandra and I will be here every step of the way, no matter what they throw at us. Sandra turned to Daniel. Mr. Reed, your witness statement will be critical. We'll need to ensure every detail is documented. Of course, Daniel replied, his voice resolute. I'll make sure my statement is clear and thorough. This officer needs to face the consequences of his actions. She looked back at Jamal, her face softening slightly. Now, Jamal, this lawsuit will send a strong message, and it has the potential to impact not only Officer Walker, but the entire department. They'll feel the pressure to address what's happened, and the public will demand answers. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're making a stand that could help others, too. The weight of her words settled over him. It was intimidating, yes, but it also filled him with a strange sense of purpose. For years, he'd been overlooked, dismissed. Now, he was finally getting the chance to confront the very forces that had tried to erase him. Jamal nodded, his voice firm. I'll do whatever it takes. I'm ready. Sandra gave a final nod of approval, closing the file in her lap. Good, then we'll get started. I'll be in touch over the next few days to go over additional details, and we'll begin building our case. This is a long road, but we're in this together. As they rose to leave, Daniel placed a reassuring hand on Jamal's shoulder. Remember, Jamal, this isn't just about winning a case. This is about standing up and being counted. You're not alone anymore. Jamal felt a renewed strength surging within him. The isolation he'd felt for so long was beginning to fade, replaced by a shared determination. He wasn't just another nameless face in the crowd anymore. He was a man with a voice, with people willing to stand by him. They stepped out of the office, the sun now lower in the sky, casting a warm glow over the city. As they walked down the bustling street, Jamal felt a sense of resolve, unlike any he'd known. This fight wasn't just his. It was for everyone who had ever been silenced, overlooked, and pushed aside. The following days passed in a blur as Jamal was pulled into the whirlwind of the legal process. Each morning, he'd find himself meeting with Sandra or Daniel, going over documents, recounting every detail of his encounter with Officer Walker. Each time he told his story, the anger in him settled into a more focused determination, a drive to see this through. On the third day after filing, Sandra called him into her office with a sense of urgency in her voice. Jamal arrived to find both her and Daniel waiting, their faces grave but focused. Jamal, Sandra greeted him as he took a seat. She tapped a thick folder on her desk. There's something you need to know. Since we filed the lawsuit, the police department has launched an internal investigation into Walker's behavior. They're taking this seriously. More importantly, other officers are starting to come forward about Walker. Jamal's eyes widened. You mean they're actually looking into him? Sandra nodded. Yes, and from what we're hearing, there have been complaints filed against him before, but they were either dismissed or quietly resolved. This case of yours is drawing attention they can't ignore. Daniel leaned forward, his expression intense. This is exactly what we hoped for, Jamal. Walker's actions have gone unchecked for too long, and now, finally, he's facing scrutiny. Jamal sat back, a mix of emotions swirling inside him. Relief, anger, and a simmering sense of justice. So they're finally seeing him for what he is. Sandra nodded, glancing at her notes. But I need you to understand that this won't make things easier. Walker's department isn't happy about this investigation. They're likely to push back, and you might face backlash in the media. The more attention this gets, the harder they'll fight to discredit you. Jamal's gaze hardened. Let them try. I'm not backing down now. Sandra gave him a faint smile of approval. Good. We'll keep moving forward, no matter what they throw at us. Over the next few days, the case gained traction. News outlets picked up the story. Reporters began calling, and soon enough, the local media was buzzing with coverage about a homeless man filing a lawsuit against an officer. Photos of Jamal were everywhere, along with interviews where he spoke openly about what had happened, his words steady and sure. But with the coverage came the inevitable backlash. Online comments flooded social media, with some people supporting Jamal, while others accused him of lying, of trying to tarnish the name of a dedicated officer. The strain was exhausting, each negative remark chipping away at his resolve. But Daniel and Sandra were always there, reminding him of why he was fighting. One evening, as he sat in Sandra's office, a knock interrupted their meeting. A young intern poked his head in, his face pale. Ms. Mills, there's someone here. Another officer. He wants to talk about the case. He says he has information on Walker. Sandra's eyebrows shot up in surprise, and she glanced at Jamal, who looked equally taken aback. She nodded to the intern. Send him in. A tall man entered the room, his police uniform pristine, but his posture tense. He looked around, hesitating before settling his gaze on Jamal. Mr. Thompson, he said, his voice quiet but clear. I'm Officer Grant. I know what happened with Walker, and I think it's time someone spoke up. Jamal exchanged a look with Sandra, who gestured for Grant to sit. Thank you for coming forward, Officer Grant. What can you tell us? Grant took a deep breath, as though steadying himself. I've worked with Walker for years, and I've seen his behavior, his tendency to target certain individuals, particularly minorities. He's had complaints filed against him, but they were always dismissed. People in the department have looked the other way. Jamal felt a surge of anger, remembering Walker's words, his confidence that no one would believe Jamal, that he could get away with anything. But why now? Jamal asked, his voice laced with skepticism. Why come forward after all this time? Grant looked down, shame flickering in his expression. Because it's overdue, and because I see now that I was wrong to stay silent. Walker has been getting away with this for too long, and seeing this case go public made me realize I can't keep turning a blind eye. Sandra nodded, her tone measured. Officer Grant, would you be willing to make a statement? Your testimony could be crucial in building our case. Grant hesitated, glancing at the floor. I know the risks. I'll be putting myself in a difficult position with the department, but yes, I'm willing to make a statement. Jamal watched him, feeling a surge of unexpected respect. He knew that speaking up could jeopardize Grant's career, his relationships with his colleagues. It was a step most people would shy away from. Thank you, Jamal said quietly, and the sincerity in his voice made Grant look up, meeting his gaze directly. I appreciate you coming forward. Grant nodded, standing up. I'll leave my contact information with Ms. Mills. You have my word. I'll do what I can to support this case. After Grant left, Sandra turned to Jamal, her eyes bright with determination. This is a significant development, Jamal. Having an officer willing to testify about Walker's misconduct is a huge boost to our case. Daniel nodded. This isn't just about your encounter anymore. Walker's history is coming to light. We're building a strong foundation, and they'll have a hard time brushing this off. But as the investigation grew, so did the tension. The police department, now under scrutiny, began pushing back, releasing statements defending their officers and emphasizing Walker's years of service. They claimed his actions were misunderstood and that he'd simply been enforcing the law. The media lapped up the conflicting narratives, and public opinion swayed back and forth. One night, as Jamal sat alone in his small rented room, his phone buzzed with a message from Daniel. "Daniel, hang in there. They'll try to wear you down, but we're making progress. Don't let them intimidate you." Jamal stared at the message for a long moment, letting the words sink in. He was exhausted, the pressure and doubt gnawing at him constantly. But he knew Daniel was right. He couldn't give in now, not when he'd come this far. As the days passed, more people came forward. Other civilians who had faced Walker's wrath, quietly submitting their own complaints through Sandra's office. Each new voice added weight to the case, turning it into something much larger than Jamal had ever anticipated. And then, the media reached out for an official comment from Jamal. Sandra arranged for him to meet with a journalist, a young woman who seemed genuinely interested in understanding his story. They met in a modest cafe, where Jamal, for the first time, opened up to the world about his experience. "I was just there," he told her, his voice steady, his words clear. "I wasn't causing any trouble, wasn't doing anything wrong. But Walker, he didn't care. To him, I was a problem because of how I looked, because of who I am." The journalist nodded, scribbling notes as she listened. "What do you hope will come out of this case, Mr. Thompson?" Jamal thought for a moment, his gaze drifting to the street outside, where people went about their lives, oblivious to the struggle he faced. "I hope that one day, people like Walker can't get away with this. That we don't have to be afraid of the people who are supposed to protect us. I want justice. Not just for me, but for everyone who's been treated like they're less than human." As he spoke, he felt a renewed strength coursing through him. This wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about standing up against something much bigger than himself. The day of the court hearing arrived, and Jamal felt the weight of it settle over him as he entered the courthouse. The air buzzed with tension, the kind of charged energy that only comes when something important is about to unfold. Sandra walked beside him, her expression focused and resolute. Daniel was there too, a steady presence, giving him a reassuring nod as they passed through the crowded hallways. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was somber. Rows of benches were filled with onlookers, reporters, and a handful of people Jamal didn't recognize but assumed had come to support him. He noticed Officer Grant seated near the front, his posture rigid as he stared ahead, his expression unreadable. This was a defining moment, not just for Jamal, but for everyone who'd faced Walker's abuse. At the defense table, Walker sat beside his lawyer, his face expressionless but his eyes cold and fixed on Jamal. Jamal held his gaze, refusing to look away. This was the man who had tried to strip him of his dignity, who had kicked him to the ground and treated him like he was nothing. But today, Jamal would finally have a voice. The judge entered, and the court was called to order. Sandra wasted no time, her opening statements clear and forceful. She painted a vivid picture of the incident, describing in precise detail what Walker had done to Jamal that day, each word underscoring the officer's abuse of power and the pain it had caused. Her voice was steady, controlled, but filled with an intensity that made every listener sit up and take notice. Then came Jamal's turn. Sandra called him to the stand, and he took a deep breath as he stood, feeling the eyes of everyone in the courtroom on him. He walked to the witness stand, his heart pounding but his resolve strong. Sandra approached him, her gaze gentle but encouraging. "Jamal, I know this is difficult, but I need you to tell the court what happened that day. Every detail matters." Jamal looked out over the room, his voice steady but low. "I was sitting on the steps of a closed shop. I wasn't doing anything, just trying to stay out of the way. That's when Officer Walker came up to me." His voice grew stronger as he continued, recounting every word Walker had said, every taunt and insult. He spoke of the way Walker had looked at him, as though he were something less than human, and the way he'd kicked him, without hesitation, without remorse. The courtroom was silent, each person listening intently as Jamal described the pain, the humiliation, the sense of helplessness he'd felt. But as he spoke, he realized he was no longer that helpless man on the steps. Here, now, he had power. His words held weight, and they filled the room, resonating in a way he hadn't thought possible. When he finished, Sandra gave him a nod of approval before stepping back to allow the defense attorney his turn. The defense attorney was a seasoned man, with a slick, polished demeanor that exuded confidence. He rose from his seat, smoothing his suit, as he approached Jamal with a calculated, almost predatory smile. "Mr. Thompson," the attorney began, his tone smooth, "you mentioned that you've had encounters with law enforcement before. Would you say that you have a history with authority?" Jamal narrowed his eyes, already sensing the angle the lawyer was taking. "I've had run-ins, yes, but that doesn't give anyone the right to treat me like Walker did." The attorney feigned a look of concern. "Of course, but wouldn't you agree that someone with a troubled past might view authority with a certain bias, perhaps even misinterpret an officer's actions?" Sandra rose immediately, her voice sharp. "Objection. Speculative and irrelevant." The judge nodded, sustained. "Move on, counselor." The defense attorney sighed, as if disappointed, then shifted his tactics. "Mr. Thompson, you say Officer Walker kicked you, but isn't it possible that, in the heat of the moment, you misinterpreted his actions? Perhaps he was simply trying to ensure you were complying." Jamal's jaw tightened. "I know what happened. He kicked me. Hard. There was nothing to misinterpret." The attorney pursed his lips, giving an almost patronizing nod. "I see. And yet you chose to respond with defiance, correct? By your own admission, you challenged him, argued with him. Isn't it possible that your attitude contributed to the escalation?" Jamal's voice grew louder, filled with conviction. "I didn't escalate anything. I spoke up because he was wrong. He treated me like dirt because he thought he could get away with it. And if I hadn't spoken up, he would have done worse." Sandra stepped in, her voice calm but firm. "Objection. The witness's character is not on trial here." The judge nodded, sustained. "Keep your questions focused, counselor." The defense attorney gave a tight smile, clearly frustrated, but he backed down. He asked a few more questions, each one attempting to paint Jamal as the instigator. But Jamal's answers were clear, unwavering. Each response only seemed to highlight Walker's cruelty, his abuse of power. When Jamal stepped down from the stand, he felt a wave of relief wash over him. He returned to his seat, and Sandra gave him a reassuring nod. He'd done his part. Now, it was up to the others. Sandra called Officer Grant to the stand next. Grant looked nervous but resolute as he took his oath, his eyes shifting briefly to meet Jamal's before settling on Sandra. "Officer Grant," Sandra began, "can you tell us about your experience working with Officer Walker?" Grant hesitated, then nodded. "I've worked with him for about 6 years. I've seen how he interacts with civilians, particularly people of color. He's had complaints filed against him, but they were always dismissed." Sandra nodded. "And can you confirm whether you witnessed Officer Walker using excessive force in other instances?" Grant took a deep breath. "Yes. I've seen him use unnecessary force multiple times, but I was always told to stay out of it, to mind my own business." The defense attorney quickly rose to his feet. "Objection. This testimony is based on opinion and lacks specific examples." Sandra turned to Grant. "Officer Grant, do you have any specific incidents that you can recount?" Grant nodded, his voice steady. "There was an incident last year. Walker stopped a young man for a minor infraction, something that shouldn't have warranted anything more than a warning. But Walker, he escalated the situation, used force, and the young man ended up in the hospital." The courtroom murmured, the tension growing as Grant's words settled over them. Sandra gave him a slight nod of encouragement before continuing. "Thank you, Officer Grant. Your courage in coming forward is noted. No further questions." The defense attorney attempted to discredit Grant, questioning his motives and loyalty to the department, but Grant held his ground. Each answer revealed more of Walker's pattern of behavior, painting a picture that was impossible to ignore. Finally, the defense rested, and it was time for closing statements. Sandra stood, her voice steady, filled with a passion that echoed through the room. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "what you've heard here today is a story of abuse, of power wielded carelessly by an individual entrusted to protect the very people he chose to harm. Jamal Thompson didn't ask for trouble. He didn't provoke Officer Walker. He simply wanted to exist in peace, but Officer Walker saw him as less than human, a target to be pushed around. And this is not an isolated incident. This is a pattern, one that has gone unchecked for far too long. Today, you have the power to end it." She paused, letting her words sink in. "This case isn't just about Jamal Thompson. It's about every person who has ever been silenced, overlooked, and treated as if they don't matter. I ask you to stand with him, to deliver a verdict that says we will not tolerate abuse, that justice matters for everyone. Thank you." The defense attorney gave his closing argument, but his words felt hollow, strained. He attempted to paint Walker as a dedicated officer, someone merely doing his job. but the weight of the testimony had already left its mark. As the jury deliberated, Jamal sat in silence, his heart pounding with anticipation, fear, and a glimmer of hope. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent gesture of support, and Jamal took a deep breath, grounding himself. The jury returned after what felt like an eternity, and the foreperson stood, a piece of paper in hand. We, the jury, find the defendant, Officer Bryce Walker, guilty of all charges. The room erupted in murmurs, but all Jamal could hear was the pounding of his own heartbeat. Guilty. The word echoed in his mind, each repetition a validation, a confirmation that his voice had been heard. As he looked at Sandra, Daniel, and even Officer Grant, he felt a surge of gratitude. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just a nameless face, a statistic. He was a man who had stood up, who had fought, and who had won. The weight that had burdened him for so long lifted, replaced by a profound sense of relief and hope. As Jamal stepped out of the courthouse into the afternoon light, he felt like he was breathing for the first time in years. The air was crisp and cool, carrying with it the sounds of the city around him, the hum of traffic, the faint chatter of pedestrians, and the distant call of a bird overhead. But today, everything seemed different. It was as though the city itself had opened up, welcoming him into a new chapter of his life. Daniel and Sandra walked beside him, their expressions proud but humble, their presence a constant reminder of the support he'd had through this entire journey. Jamal turned to them, gratitude swelling in his chest. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice full of emotion. "I don't think I can ever repay what you both did for me." Sandra smiled, a rare softness in her gaze. "You don't need to repay us, Jamal. You stood up for yourself and for others. That's worth more than any thanks." Daniel placed a reassuring hand on Jamal's shoulder. "You did this, Jamal. We just helped give you the platform, and I couldn't be prouder of how you used it." For a moment, the three of them stood in silence, the weight of the victory settling over them. Jamal could feel the gravity of what they'd achieved together. He hadn't just won justice for himself. He'd exposed a pattern of abuse that would reverberate through the police department for years to come. As they left the courthouse steps, a small group of reporters and supporters approached, eager to congratulate Jamal. Sandra and Daniel stepped aside, allowing Jamal to receive their support, their questions, and their congratulations. He spoke briefly, thanking everyone who had helped him, and expressing his hope for a future where people wouldn't have to fight so hard to be treated with basic dignity. After the crowd dispersed, Daniel pulled Jamal aside. "I wanted to talk to you about something," he said, his tone thoughtful. "I know this has been a lot for you, but if you're interested, I have a job opportunity." Jamal blinked, surprised. "A job? For me?" Daniel nodded. "I can't promise it's anything glamorous, but we could use someone with your determination at my company. Someone who knows what it means to stand up and persevere. If you're interested, it's yours." The offer hung in the air, filling Jamal with a sense of possibility he hadn't felt in a long time. I'd love that," he finally replied, his voice almost reverent. "Thank you, Daniel." Daniel smiled, extending a hand. "Welcome aboard, Jamal. Let's build something better together." They shook hands, the moment a quiet but powerful affirmation of the new path ahead. Over the next few weeks, life began to transform. The lawsuit's success brought Jamal a settlement, enough for him to secure a small but comfortable apartment in a safe part of the city. It wasn't grand, but it was his, a place he could call home. He furnished it carefully, savoring the simple joy of a bed, a chair, a table. Each piece was a symbol of how far he'd come, a testament to his resilience. At Daniel's company, Jamal found himself gradually adapting to his new role. It was challenging, filled with moments of uncertainty, but with Daniel's mentorship and the encouragement of his new colleagues, he began to find his footing. The work gave him a sense of purpose, a reason to get up each morning. He was no longer invisible. He was part of something larger, a team that valued him for who he was and what he could bring. One afternoon, months after the trial, Jamal found himself standing by a park, watching families and children play. The world felt different now, brighter, more open, like he finally had a place in it. A sense of peace settled over him, a quiet joy he hadn't known in years. As he looked around, he spotted Officer Grant, the man who had taken a risk to testify on his behalf. Jamal approached him, his steps sure and steady. "Grant," he greeted with a nod. "I didn't expect to see you here." Grant looked up, surprised but pleased. "Jamal, good to see you. How's everything been?" Jamal smiled, his expression one of calm satisfaction. Better than I could have ever expected. I wanted to thank you, for speaking up. Grant shrugged, looking a bit uncomfortable. It was the right thing to do. I just wish I'd done it sooner. You did it when it mattered, Jamal replied, his tone genuine. And because of you, things are finally changing. That's worth something. They shared a quiet moment of understanding, a connection formed through shared courage and the will to do what was right. As Jamal walked away, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The court case had been a victory, but it wasn't the end. Jamal had decided he wanted to do more, to give back, to help others who felt lost or voiceless. He began volunteering at local shelters, speaking with those who were struggling, offering them the same hope he'd found with Daniel and Sandra's support. Each time he shared his story, he felt a sense of healing, a reminder that he was more than his past. In time, Jamal became known in the community as a beacon of resilience, someone who had faced injustice head-on and emerged stronger. He was no longer the man on the steps, invisible and overlooked. He was a man who had found his strength, his voice, and his place in the world.